welcome our speakers. And I would like to introduce you Stefano Gentile. He's a legal expert, copyright and trademark law specialist, working for the European Joint Research Center in ISPRA and in Brussels. And he will present us some of the legal barriers when sharing and using and how we can overcome these, hopefully also enriched by his own experience, personal experience. So, Stefano, floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. That's a fair number of people. I'm glad that you are interested in open source. How many of you are familiar with open source? All right, okay. Okay, we start already like that. This 10 minutes I would like to talk about open source as a means of sharing software. As you know, open source is a sharing philosophy based on standard licensing. I call it philosophy because at its root, open source communities use copyright in order to enable the widest possible dissemination of software and promote collaborative software developments. It is important to say from the onset that open source is not the negation of copyright. Copyright is there to stay. However, it is the particular way of using copyright that makes open source licenses so special and so useful. In the words of the Free Software Foundation, the freedoms, and I quote, that stem from the open source philosophy are essential for society as a whole because they promote social solidarity, that is sharing and cooperation, which is what we're here for today. These freedoms translate into the 4 rights you see there on the screen: use, copy, modify, and distribute, which are the leitmotif of every single open source license out there. If one of these is missing, we're not talking about free and open source licensing. And yet, these licenses are sometimes perceived more as a burden than a facilitator, an instrument to facilitate sharing and reuse. I'm going to explain briefly why, but before getting into this topic, I would like to briefly wrap up one of the most traditional repetition or categorization of open source, the one between permissive and copyleft open source licenses. As you know, permissive licenses are designed to enable the widest possible dissemination of code. They are quite simple in their text, and they don't aim at having any control of the modification and redistribution of the code. There are a reduced number of conditions applied to it, and they have a specific purpose in the open source communities. They're conceived to enable. On the other side of the spectrum, we have copyleft licensing, which is, we'll see that in a second, what represents the most problems or issues amongst people, especially those who are not very familiar with legal issues. Copyleft licenses are conceived to maintain software code and its modification open. So in a way, they contain a special clause that requires that any modification of the source code and any redistribution thereof, or any inclusion of the source code in a larger program, will also be licensed under the same terms and conditions. We are on the same page here, right? You follow me? Okay. For this reason, there is some intention to retain some form of control in using a copyleft license, just like the UPL, the GPL being the most famous representative of this category. Both are valid methods of disseminating software, and both have their merits. However, because of the proliferation in the years of bespoke or standard copyleft licenses that several communities thought they might create for themselves, and because of the viral effect of a copyleft license, by reusing code that was released under different copyleft licenses, we end up in what is effectively an incompatibility, a legal incompatibility. The software might be super compatible. You can mishmash, basically, and this is a practice that we are also witnesses sometimes in the European Commission of code without taking into considerations the legal limitations that come with copyleft licensing, the result might be that the downstream distribution of a larger program that incorporates one or more copyleft licenses is not possible at all. And this is what I call the paradox of copyleft, because if you consider that copyleft has been devised first and foremost to forbid restriction to sharing, so the code that is being put out there is there to stay open, irrespective of how many modifications it will undergo by third parties. The practice of mixing different copyleft licenses results actually in the opposite. It forbids distributions. Remember that in the copyleft licensing, the trigger of the copyleft is in the distribution, in the act of distribution. That can take several forms. Oops. Now, because my previous presentations have reported software solutions being included in GitHub, I think it's pertinent to show you a quite alarming situation on online repositories. As you know, GitHub is one of the most popular open source distributed control platform on the web. And you're seeing the percentage of repositories licensed over time. You see a steep decrease in the number of these repositories having a license at all. We know right now that less than 20% of these IT projects on GitHub have a license. The spike that you see in between 2013 and 2014 is an attempt from GitHub to help the project leaders actually to pick a license, to understand which license is best suited for them. And yet we are only below 20% in the number of licensed repositories currently. What these statistics are not showing is just how effective is the choice of not having a license in order to facilitate sharing. Or is the absence of a license improving the reuse of software code? In other terms, is the absence of a license is it a valid way of sharing code? I will not withhold the answer from you because we have only 4 minutes left right now. But the answer is no. And the quick answer is no, and the reason is copyright again. Copyright, we all know, is an exclusive right and is automatically applied. Irrespective of whether you want to enforce your rights in your IT solution, copyright protects it by the mere fact that it's original. Now, making your software available on GitHub without a license, at best, represents an intent from the copyright holder to show his code so that somebody else may study it, understand functionalities, understand the structure of a software. However, you haven't shared anything at all. Let's reflect on this aspect. What is a license if not the transposition into legal terms of the intention of a right holder? And therefore, if a license is not provided, how can you infer what the intentions of the right holder was? So we can say from all this that, and this is the point that I would like you to take home, that releasing software code without any license is not a solution for reuse. Now, because we have only a few minutes available, I would like to try a simplistic, by all means, very quick and simplistic categorization of situations that my service in the Commission has encountered and the way we generally advise our colleagues on the license that is best suited for their case. Now, the first case is the full-fledged own project. So it's when you have a complete out-of-the-box IT solution or an application software that you are initiating and bringing forward. In this case, it makes perfectly sense to have a copyleft license, just like the UPL, to disseminate your software code. The use of copyright there is to ensure that further developments will remain open. So further public administration, for example, may use the same solution and contribute to it and then recontribute it for the community, and so on and so forth. And in here, you might also choose, depending on what the policies of your organization, non-copyleft licenses, just like the MIT, why not? However, if you are contributing to third-party projects, this is the most tricky part. Normally, these projects already come with a licensing strategy. So it will make no sense to be, as an organization, stubborn on using only one form of open source licensing because this is what we know. If the project is already licensed with an Eclipse public license and then you insist on using GPL, well, chances are that people will not be inclined to use or to adopt your contribution in their project because of downstream compatibility conflict with the licenses. So you're maximizing the usefulness and the chances of your code being reused by either adopting the same license that the project already established or adopting a permissive license. Share it with an MIT license, why not? The third case is if you're writing libraries or frameworks, any code that actually doesn't have a specific target and a specific project that can be reused by several projects instead. In any of these situations, actually, copyleft is never a good choice. At least strong copyleft is not a good choice. Because if our goal is to maximize the sharing and reuse of code, in these particular situations, you want the widest possible adoption of a library for several projects. Even in the private sector, why not? Therefore, the advice that we usually give here is to resort to permissive licenses, like the MIT, for example, and not GPL. And with this, I have concluded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefano.